Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to episode 184 of the Falcoholic Live. I am your host, Kevin Knight, joined by my wonderful co-host, guest extraordinaire this evening. He is Will McFadden, at Will McFadden, host of the Believe in Falcons podcast. Will, how are we doing tonight?
I'm doing well, Kevin. Excited to get on here, talk some Falcons draft takes. I know we have some free agency signings, but doesn't really feel like it's just draft season at this
Yeah.
point for Atlanta.
Yeah, it's draft season is in full swing. There's really like I could, tweet out this detailed analysis of free agent signings, and then people will be like, "So Kevin, who are they taking at 8 though?" Like, thank you for this, but like also we don't really care. So it's just it is the season. 'Tis the season for draft takes. Obviously I've got some spicy ones. The whether or not the Falcons might consider quarterback at 8 is very contentious, so we'll get into that for your enjoyment, folks. Also, some other generic stuff, and I'm sure you guys will have questions too, so feel free to throw those in there. But yeah, like Will said, we do have some free agents to talk about. Possibly impactful free agents. Not necessarily at the top of anyone's list in terms of guys that are going to light the league on fire or anything, but possible starters for Atlanta, which maybe isn't saying much, but it is worth discussing. So we do have, first of all, linebacker Rashaan Evans, former first-round pick of the Titans, most recently with the Titans for the last 4 years. They did not pick up his option. Evans has been around a solid starter, maybe, according to PFF, a little bit less than that, but productive player, started a lot of games for Tennessee, had his best seasons with Dean Pease, notably. So there is some upside potentially there with Evans, obviously, as a first-round pick. He was looked at as a guy who could be an impact player. Do you have any takes at all on Rashaan Evans, Will? Do you think that he's in line to start? Is he going to compete with who we have? What are your sort of instant thoughts on that signing?
Yeah. I mean, I think he'll definitely compete, right? Because there's going to be competition everywhere. The Falcons aren't good enough, really, maybe outside of like AJ Terrell and Grady Jarrett and Kyle Pitts to say, yeah, there's no competition anywhere.
Right.
So yeah, I definitely think that he will be given an opportunity in camp to carve out however big a role the Falcons feel he deserves. He's got familiarity with Dean Pease, so it's not like he's coming in here totally new. He's going to have not a leg up, but certainly not be a step behind. And I think that's going to help him. Mainly as I was going back and looking at PFF and just kind of his breakdown of how he's been used throughout his career. He mentioned his first 2 seasons in the league were with Dean Pease in Tennessee. Notably, his second season, 2019, kind of that's when you see a player you want maybe to take a jump. And that was his highest usage rate as a pass rusher in the NFL so far in his career by a pretty decent margin. And he had 3 sacks that season, 13 hurries. So I think that that's kind of how we're going to see Atlanta use is maybe as a sub package linebacker because he's got the speed, he can do that, but mainly as not a pass rush specialist because I don't think he's that good as a pass rusher, but certainly that's an element of their game I expect them to explore because it kind of seems like maybe that's how Dean Pease intended on using him in Tennessee. And now that he's got him in Atlanta and the Falcons could obviously use all the pass rushing help they can get, I think that's going to be a big part of his role.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's important in this scheme, especially when you're considering that the Falcons probably, once again, aren't going to have a very good edge group. It'll hopefully be better than last year. I think we like the Lorenzo Carter signing as a guy who can contribute, and we'll see. We expect them to add at least 1, if not 2, edge rushers in the draft. But it's still not going to be a great pass rush overall. We'll be hoping on a better overall unit, but they're going to depend on the blitzing. They did last year to some extent, and it was effective at times, certainly.
But I don't think they got as much from the blitz as they wanted. I don't think they opened up the full array of blitzes that Dean Pease would like to use. So, I don't even know if we have seen what the blitzing part of this defense will really look like. So that is one thing I'm really excited to see because I think from a learning standpoint, they were a little bit behind the 8 ball last year.
Yeah, and what, Dean Pease mentioned it during the season, but he was like, oh yeah, we've only really installed, a portion of the playbook at this time. And his defenses are known for being complex, and he demands a lot of his players, particularly his safeties, which is why it might be a little bit more understandable that a rookie like Richie Grant, who didn't really play in that sort of system at UCF at all, was taking a little bit more time to get used to it. At least that's the hope. So, Rashaan Evans certainly offers that sort of blitz ability. He didn't do it a lot, especially after Dean Pease left. I think he had like a half sack total after Dean Pease left Tennessee. Evans's thing is that he's not a great coverage player. His athleticism isn't that great that you would expect him to be this like dynamic sort of man coverage option. He's serviceable in zone. I mean, I think honestly his coverage numbers aren't that bad. I think last year he allowed like an 82 passer rating in coverage, which is really not that bad. 76% completion rate, but a lot of these times these linebackers are going up against running backs that are catching passes in the flat, so they're not necessarily contesting the throws. Yeah. He did have 2 picks last year too, so he seems like he's a player who's developing a little bit in coverage. Maybe, getting him in a scheme that we know he's familiar with, he could have an instant impact there. Maybe with some growth as a pass defender, plus his ability as a pass rusher maybe being unleashed a little bit more in Atlanta, you could sort of squint a little bit and be like, okay, this is a guy that maybe we can hope for a bigger impact here than he had the last couple years in Tennessee. But I do like the signing, particularly with the status of Deion Jones sort of being in question. That's sort of a good way to segue into that discussion a little bit, which is he was not traded. Maybe the last time you were on, I don't remember, we were talking probably about, will Deion Jones be traded and the salary cap, and like he was not traded, which means that now they sort of have to wait until after June 1st to make any sort of move with him. So, with Rashaan Evans coming in, does that give you any sort of thought about, well, they're definitely going to move him, or is it still sort of up in the air for you, or do you think they're just going to hold on to Deion Jones at this point?
I think they're probably just going to hold on to Deion Jones at this point. I think we get to a point where it's, to some degree, they need to keep players around. They can't totally just bottom out. And Deion's contract is one of the trickier ones that they have on the books. So that's why it's they're not really going to rework it. It may, a team may look at, do they want to move for that deal? So I could see the Falcons say, look, if Deion has had a bad year last year, but I kind of have a take that I'm working on. And maybe I'll just unveil it right here, Kevin. So react however you see fit.
Okay.
Is there a chance that, not maybe to this degree, but the transformation we saw offensively from 2015 to 2016 under Kyle Shanahan, can we see something similar defensively from 2021 to 2022 under Dean Pease? I think that they are both equally complex systems for different reasons. I think that they both free up their players, but also ask a lot of their players. I think that we all had high expectations for Dean Pease's scheme, and Deion Jones could be a player who really does benefit from that second year, from getting just a full season to work with it, see it in games, see all these live reps, and then get an off season to study and figure out what went wrong and where he can improve. I also think that he'll be freed up to go back to a little bit of the role that Foye took over, which is where he has excelled. And frankly, I'm not sure how much the Falcons are going to put on their linebackers coverage-wise this year.
Right.
The strength now, weirdly, coverage-wise, is their secondary.
Yeah.
They've got 2 good corners. Isaiah Oliver, we're going to see, what he looks like, but I think a lot of people are cautiously optimistic. Their safeties, again, they're stockpiling people there. Richie Grant now step up. Eric Harris back. And that's not to say anything about Javian Hawkins, who has really shined as well, kind of in his moments. I don't know how much they're going to ask Rashaan Evans to cover another team, cover Cameron Brate. I don't know how much they're going to be relying on that. I kind of think that they can mix and match a lot on their defense. And I'm cautiously optimistic about that side of the ball in 2022, because I think they're going to get a bump just from a second year in Dean Pease's scheme.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, if you were to sort of objectively look at things last year, the expectations were a lot higher for the offense. and a lot lower for the defense relative to what actually happened. And, we could go into a lot of stuff about why the offense had more struggles than expected and that sort of thing. But on defense, they really did play better than the sum of their parts. And that was the first time I think we've seen that in a long time in Atlanta, where this defense legitimately outplayed its talent level. And, a lot of that had to do with scheme. And, a lot of it had to do with the emergence of AJ Terrell as like a legitimate cornerback one elite sort of player. But I totally agree with the take that, and I will sort of expound upon it, that I think not only will we see the defense sort of become a more integral part of this team, which is what fans have been clamoring for basically forever, maybe since John Abraham left, is that it's probably also going to coincide with an offensive philosophy change as well. Probably out of necessity this year, to a more run-heavy, more Arthur Smith offense, as opposed to last year, which was more of a hybrid of the previous system with a lot of old pieces still here. I think the Falcons have kind of shown us on the offensive side of the ball that they're not going to spend big at wide receiver this year. Like, they're going to draft guys, certainly. I mean, we don't know exactly who or when, but they're going to draft guys. But they're not breaking the bank to go out and sign any impact wide receivers. They're sort of bringing in the guys that would fit Arthur Smith's system, like Auden Tate, tremendous blocker, huge possession guy. They have Kyle Pitts already. That's obviously a huge guy, but is also, amazing athlete. And then they bring in, sort of a Z guy, Demir Bird, as a slot / sort of outside speedster. So they're going to cobble it together there. But I don't think it's going to be as much of an emphasis on the passing game as it has been basically for every year since Matt Ryan really took the helm of this team in like 2011, since the arrival of Dirk Cutter, basically, and later. And I think that's a necessary change until they really get not only the receiving core, but also the quarterback in place. And, that's not meant to be necessarily a slight at Marcus Mariota, but I mean, it's a lot to expect this team to be able to throw the ball at the volume they have. Still, like, I just don't think that they can. It's not going to work. Yeah.
Matt Ryan had the most pass attempts in the league for 2 years in a row under Dirk Cutter in 2020 or 2019 and 2020. That's not happening with Marcus Mariota. Yeah. I would be absolutely shocked if the Falcons are leading the league in pass attempts. So yeah, they're going to, I think, emphasize the run game a lot more. That utilizes his unique talents. And I think that's part of the reason why they decided to bring him here, because there is, a little bit of a higher floor when you've got somebody who's mobile. But I'm still not fully, I do think they're going to address wide receiver in the draft.
Yeah, for sure.
But is it crazy to think that they may just kind of punt on this position, like writ large in 2022? Because I keep coming back to thinking in terms of baseball, when you're building a baseball roster, and it's kind of like, well, if you have no offense, then do you really need to invest in your relief pitching? Because you're probably not going to have leads, and that's just could be an expensive part. So maybe you go cheap in that area and you save funds and use them somewhere else. I just wonder, are the Falcons going to get a bunch of cheap veteran minimum 1-year contracts at a bunch of these skill positions, like running back, like wide receiver? And then maybe you draft one. Maybe if you truly believe that there is a game-changing wide receiver in this draft, then you take one. But maybe they don't, and they just don't. And then we're sitting here being like, what are you doing at wide receiver? And they're like, look, we didn't feel like we needed to tie ourselves down for a huge amount of money in a market this offseason that was pretty big for wide receivers. And look, it's no secret. I don't think they're going to be great next season. So is there really a big difference between 3 wins and 4 wins because you have a rookie first round pick out there, a wide receiver? Probably not.
Yeah. And that's definitely a topic we're going to cover in detail when we get to the full-time draft takes, because we'll talk about QB at 8. It's in the headline. It's probably the most contentious possible pick, but wide receiver at 8 is definitely part of the conversation. And I think I can sort of see where you're going with this, Will, and that you're probably not a fan of wide receiver at 8. I know you've been doing a lot of the scouting reports. True. Oh, you're not? Oh, you want a wide receiver at 8. Okay. Well, it'll get really spicy then.
I contain multitudes.
Okay. Complicated. The duality of man and such. Yes. Yeah, so I mean, yes, we'll talk about that too. I do want to get to the other free agent signing before we devolve completely into draft takes, which was offensive lineman Jermaine Ifedi, most recently of the Bears, just like every other free agent of this team, but also of the Seahawks and a lot of other teams. So Ifedi has played right tackle and right guard. It seems most likely that he's being brought in to compete at right tackle because the Falcons don't need a right guard. I'm not sure that he's ever played on the left side at the NFL level. So I think, people that are like, oh, well, is he going to compete with Mayfield? Probably not. I think Ifedi is a legitimate starting right tackle. I don't know that he's like a plus starter there, but he's certainly a solid one. Each of the past 2 years, he's graded out as a solid or above starter. So yeah, what do you think about the Ifedi signing? And where do you sort of see him factoring in this roster?
I think back to something that and I don't know if this name is taboo on this podcast or not, but that Thomas Dimitroff told me.
Whoa.
Several off seasons ago, I guess now at this point. I think it was before the Chris Lindstrom and Caleb McGarry drafts. But basically, where I think the league is moving when it comes to offensive linemen is, unless you're fortunate enough to draft kind of a generational type of player like a Quentin Nelson, I don't think you're going to see teams spend huge in free agency, maybe unless there is somehow like an Alex Mack that gets free, who has just been an all pro throughout his career. And for some reason, they're letting him hit market, or maybe still left tackle. But by and large, things that matter are depth on the offensive line and just not being the worst in the league at your position. As long as you can have a relatively average level, a floor for all of your offensive linemen, and you can kind of get that too deep on your depth chart, teams will be pretty happy, I think, with their offensive line situation going into seasons. Because, and if you'll listen to, Arthur Smith's press conferences, especially in the trenches, they're very aware of the role attrition plays throughout an NFL season. And the Falcons were really lucky last year, honestly, to start the guys as frequently on the offensive line as they did. They really, really lucked out with the injury situation on the offensive line, which is valuable because it gave, guys like Jalen Mayfield and Matt Hennessy all of those extra reps. They got those starts with the guys who they'll, presumably be with again this year. But whether Ifedi comes in and takes the starting job from Caleb McGarry, or is just now all of a sudden your backup kind of swing right side guy with the right guard and the right tackle, that's valuable because he is maybe not the best player in the world, but he's a good NFL player. And if you lose Caleb McGarry, who is not, again, the best player in the world, but he's not a bad NFL player. He's somewhere kind of between average and good, maybe dips below average at times. I'm not going to defend Caleb McGarry's career to you people.
Well, we have Aaron Freeman on here enough for that. So yeah.
There you go. Oh my God, Aaron and I agree on something. Yeah. But I think that Ifedi just is, you're not going to really lose much if he has to step in. And that's what I think the key is here on the offensive line. And that's where I think you're going to see the league go a lot. When you've got a guy like Jake Matthews or Chris Lindstrom, that's awesome. You don't let him get away because you want to build over time and hit on these spots in the trenches and hopefully build a behemoth like Dallas. But even if you don't, get a couple of these key pieces and then just get really high floor play from the other pieces in your spot, and then go too deep. And that's what I think the Falcons are doing with a lot of their offensive line moves so far this season. Ifedi, I think, being the best of the bunch.
Yeah, I do think he certainly has the most starting potential and has the most starting experience, certainly, of any of the, 4 guys they brought in. Elijah Wilkinson, I think, has starting potential. I think he could be a swing tackle type of player, but Ifedi, it has been a starter and at least an average one, and it just depends on what they want out of right tackle, right? Because I think what you said about Caleb McGarry is dead on, because I think he sort of oscillates between looking like really good for some games. He shut down Cam Jordan one game. He's had some really good run blocking games, that sort of thing. And then he'll have these games where he just gets abused and is a liability.
Yeah.
And I think Ifedi isn't going to have the highs that McGarry can give you, but I think he's also going to prevent the lows as well. And I think we could see the Falcons value that more. They might value that consistency more than the ceiling of McGarry that comes along with the issues. And this regime is not at all attached to McGarry. I mean, I think they're happy to have him here as like an option, and I think they would have been totally fine with him turning into a starter and turning into a plus starter and keeping him long term if that had worked out. But I think they sort of suspected that's probably not going to happen. They're not going to pick up his option.
Well, I think it's worth mentioning as well, the start to his time with Arthur Smith and this coaching staff didn't get off to, the best start. He missed a good bit of training camp. It didn't sound like they were super thrilled as to the reason why. And, you talk about kind of being behind the eight ball, that got him, I think, a little bit off to a slower start. And then maybe he was playing catch up throughout the season. So yeah, you could look at that as a reason why maybe the coaching staff is saying, hey, you don't have this job outright. We're bringing in competition for you because of, X, Y, and Z reasons, and your play didn't match what we need from you. Or you could maybe look at it with a little more rosy colored view and say, maybe they feel that with another offseason, with a training camp install, all of that stuff, we'll get a better version of Caleb McGarry. And Ifedi is here to push him, get the most out of him, because they do believe, like you said, in these moments where we see that he does absolutely belong in this league and can play at a high level in this league, that's still worth investing in.
Yeah, and I think we saw that they were trying to challenge McGarry last year. It ended up not working out because obviously Matt Gono didn't play and, missed the whole season, missed training camp. The only other guy that was really competing at all was Jalen Mayfield, who they clearly wanted to play guard, but he sort of had to play right tackle in the preseason until McGarry was healthy, which didn't help him or McGarry. But, I think they gave Matt Gono a lot of money last year. They paid him the most of any free agent, technically, in terms of his year one salary. I think it was like $3.4 million or something like that. Yeah. So they clearly thought he would have an impact. Obviously, it didn't work out, but this is the same thing again this year with Ifedi coming in once again to push McGarry. And, I think McGarry should still be the favorite, but I would not be shocked at all if Ifedi is the starter and McGarry is more the swing guy. I think Elijah Wilkinson is a quality depth piece as well. So I think overall their tackle group is like solid to good overall in terms of their total depth and everything. But, I still think they will strongly consider taking an offensive tackle like on day 2 if one they like is there, because I think long-term, Ifedi's not really going to be a long-term solution for this offensive line. It's more of a stopgap. And, if they don't get a right tackle of the future this year that they can develop, it'll probably once again be a topic next offseason, because it seems like Gary's probably going to walk, and they're trying to possibly replace him this year. It doesn't really bode well for them wanting to re-sign him next year. So we will see how that goes. But yeah, I do like the Ifedi signing. I think it's a good one. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Kevin.
I was going to transition to draft takes. So if there's any more you wanted to say about
I want to get into the
or
draft
McGarry,
takes.
Yeah, this is
I want
your
to get
last
into
chance.
the draft takes.
Okay. Before we start that, guys, please like and subscribe. Really appreciate that. I wanted to say welcome to Timothy Fisher, who says he's a first time. This is his first time watching the live show. He always watches it, the recording, but he's finally able to tune in. So welcome, Tim. Thanks for coming. Happy you're able to get to catch us live finally. And then also we got George Costanza with the $3. What's up, George? He says, let me bust that Willis bubble. Okay, George is coming in hot immediately with the takes. He says, threw for 173 and 3 picks against Ole Miss last year. That Ole Miss D, as you know, strikes fear into everyone. Also threw for 162 and 2 picks against ULL. That's definitely a top 10 pick. I think George is saying he likes Matt Corral in the second or possibly at the end of the first. I know Matt Corral has a lot of fans, and also I'm aware that Willis had a very up and down season. That is definitely a big part of his evaluation, George. The reason that teams are considering him in the top 10 is because of Josh Allen mostly. Josh Allen has sort of changed everything, because before Josh Allen, it was like you're a fool if you think a quarterback can get better at the NFL level. It so rarely happens. And then Josh Allen came in and blew up the league and might, be in contention for the number one quarterback in the entire NFL. Completely changed the shape of the Bills. And Willis has that sort of upside, and that's why he's in contention. And I guess this is as good a time as any to talk about quarterback at 8 as a possibility. So thank you for getting us started on that, George. But whether it's Malik Willis or someone else, what do you think about the possibility of quarterback at 8? Will, do you think it is legitimate? Do you think it's really far-fetched? Do you think it's not going to happen at all? So where are you falling on that at this point in the process?
I think we should treat it as legitimate, because we have to at this point. Whether I think I fall on the line of optimistic about Marcus Mariota, at least in 2022. And I don't know if that's just me trying to be positive because as a fan in April, you don't want to be like, man, wow, we're really headed for 3-14. So yeah. I think that's just kind of, maybe you can get us to 6. But it's on the table. Of course it has to be. Because when you don't have a future franchise quarterback or somebody who even has that possibility, then you're automatically, in terms of just interest in your franchise, league-wide, nationally, what have you, like 30th best case scenario. Right. Like it's just you're really a non-entity in the storyline of the NFL season, and that's really honestly worse to be than to have like Daniel Jones as your quarterback in year 3, where nobody really believes in him. So for that reason, I think that the Falcons definitely are considering a quarterback to at least give the fan base, hey, this is the person to look to for the future. We're gonna. It almost becomes like a college team where you look at that rookie as like a freshman, and then you're kind of, all right, well, let's see what he can do as a sophomore, as a junior. All right, now he's an upperclassman. He's got it year 3. Let's see. But I look at it the other way. And unless you're enamored with one of these guys, then history has shown it doesn't make any sense to just take one to take one. Mm-hmm. I mean, how many Mitch Trubisky's, how many Daniel Joneses? We're kind of seeing it now with Jalen Hurts and Tua. Sure, they've got moments of looking really good. And there are, times when you want to buy into them because it's fun and you like the underdog story and you like the guy who gets better year after year. But Carson Wentz, for as great as he played in his rookie year and as big as he played in that year 2 jump, isn't that quarterback. For every Josh Allen, there's a Josh Rosen. And I just don't think that you take a quarterback because you have a vacancy at the future of your franchise position. And I kind of think that that's how the Falcons feel. But again, after what took place this offseason, I clearly don't know what they are thinking when it comes to this position. So yeah, from that standpoint, I absolutely think it has to be on the table at 8.
Yeah, and that's the tough part about this. And part of the discussion that I really tried to hammer home to folks was that the Falcons and any NFL team for what it matters, they don't care what you think about the draft. They don't care what the media thinks. They don't care what the Patriots think or the Saints or whoever. The Falcons care about their board that they pay their team of scouts probably not enough money to put together, but they pay them some amount of money, this professional team of scouting professionals, Anthony Robinson, this whole crew, they all put it together. They go through all this work. They stack their board. That's the board they go off of. They don't go off of my board, okay? And it's probably a good thing most of the time. But, they make their own board. They grade these players according to how they view them. And it doesn't matter to them if we view that pick as a reach or if we think Desmond Ridder is a 2nd or a 3rd rounder or whatever the hell fans are saying. If they think Desmond Ridder is a top 10 pick, they'll take him at 8 if he's there. Like, that's not, they don't care.
And also half of these guys that we're talking about are off of half of the teams in the league's board because scheme is kind of the most important thing that these teams look at. And it's something that absolutely nobody on the outside talks about because it's way too complicated to get into. So keep that in mind as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the reason why I scout specifically for the Falcons, because I can't I can't
Right.
like fathom scouting for some other team scheme. It's like I'm watching Falcons tape. I know what they want, but that's as far as I'm going. So that's how I stack my board. But even I don't assume that they have things stacked the same way that I do, because you could talk with 5 other scouts, especially in this class, about who's the best quarterback, who are your top 5 quarterbacks. Everyone's gonna have a different list. They might have the same guy at 1, they might have the same guy at 5 or something, but like no two are gonna be exactly the same, because quarterback is very difficult to scout, first of all, but also people view it differently. They value different traits differently. Some teams are going to have Malik Willis sky high because they view the ceiling as the most important part of the QB evaluation, or they view his athletic traits and running ability as more important. You know, teams like the Ravens would probably view that as a more important thing because of the way they structure their offense and stuff like that. And then other teams are going to be looking at who is the guy that's going to be able to come in and start right away. So they might be like, well, Pickett, we think Pickett's the best guy for that, or Ritter, or whoever.
And here's the thing is I just finished my scouting on Kenny Pickett today. So look for that, Falcoholics coming
there you go.
to a Twitter near you.
Yes.
But I was kind of surprised at how low I was on him.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't grade quarterbacks. I like go out of my way not to, but I have this, I looked at yours in the editor. And I honestly feel somewhat of the same way, and I think I might be adjusting my rankings. But yeah, talk about your thoughts on Pickett though while we're on it.
Well, I like what you said about preference, and to me, one of the things that I think is becoming a more difficult leap for quarterbacks because of the way, the reason for so long NFL teams valued pro style offenses in college, and they were a little bit, I think, more frequent than they are now, just because a lot of the adjustments at the line of scrimmage were on the quarterback. The offensive line adjustments, he had to, sight the blitzes, he had to make those hot calls. A lot of it was on the quarterback. That's something at the NFL level, even in some more of these, quarterback friendly offenses, most of the time still on the quarterback. And that's becoming, I think, less common in college football. And it's one of the things that concerned me with Kenny Pickett, because there were times where he just in the same game would flat out multiple times miss the hot defender coming and either take a sack or just bail out, and kind of the play would fall apart. And if you aren't able to win pre-snap, or if your pre-snap is not to the level where you're actively kind of, I'm worried about you as a quarterback if the other team is sending pressure, which I was. It got to the point one of his films, and I was like, if I was this defense, I would just be sending pressure all the time because he doesn't know where it's coming from. And it just ruins the play really before it even starts, without anybody even getting home, because Pickett's a good enough athlete to get away from it, but it just didn't look like he was ready to play within the confines of an NFL offense. And that is something that I think we all took for granted with Matt Ryan, and we'll see a difference now with Marcus Mariota, but he was so good at it, and he was so good at it from day one. We look at the very first pass to Michael Jenkins, and everybody, is like, damn, 64-yard pass, like whatever, 68, however long it was. But he read it perfectly, and he read it pre-snap, because that was back foot, boom, ball out in stride. So if you can't win before the ball is even snapped, then it kind of doesn't matter to me what you do after the snap. And he can make the throws. He's got fine arm strength. He can make plays on the move. It worries me a little bit that he's often falling away from his target as he's making these throws on the run. But that's fine. To me, it's just besides the point. And I gave him a pretty low, I think just kind of general awareness grade, and that probably bumped his grade down below where some others might have it. But to me, that's a big deal, and you've got to have that at the NFL level.
Yeah, and I think Pickett does have a high floor, but the other thing about Pickett that concerns me is that I just don't know how high his ceiling is either. Like, I think that he's a guy that can come in and produce like relatively quickly, but the arm strength is fine, but it's nowhere near as electric as some of these other guys. And as good of an athlete as he tested out, I mean, he doesn't necessarily play like this terrific athlete. He's not this great dual threat runner, even though he does run fast. And you compare that to someone like Malik Willis, who's like almost a running back in terms of how natural he is running the football. And then you look even at someone like Desmond Ritter, who the run is definitely second in terms of what he does, but he's a much more effective runner on a per carry basis. Still, he has a better flow. He actually averages like over 4 yards a carry and stuff like that with the ball. So like, it's just different levels. And I think for the Falcons, with, when they had Matt Ryan, especially, I was grading on the curve of like, they need to go for the highest ceiling guy possible. And if the guy needs a year or two to sit before he can actually take the field, like, that's fine. But just going for someone like a Kenny Pickett, who's not going to upgrade Matt Ryan at any point, until Matt Ryan retires, basically, I just didn't see the point. So I was always more zeroed in on the Malik Willis's and the Desmond Ritters, for that matter. Desmond Ritter is kind of an interesting one that we'll talk about next. Yeah. But to me, it was I want to chase the ceiling, and a scout that I respect, Joe Marino of the Draft Network, his favorite saying is, bet on traits, bet on the traits, go for the guys that have the traits to get there. Even if the tape shows that they're not quite there yet, if they've got the traits, they're more likely to make it than someone who doesn't. So at quarterback, that's kind of what I do, because I definitely don't consider myself like a mechanics expert or someone who can really evaluate the finer points of the position. But if it's sort of one of those things, you watch it and you can kind of see, obviously you can see the things that really stand out. The guys that have terrific arm strength, the guys that are great athletes. There's also sort of the intangibles. And I think, sort of transitioning to Desmond Ritter a little bit, he's got those in spades. This is a bona fide on-field leader. This is a battle-tested 4-year starter who took a group, a G5, a group of 5 team further than any other quarterback in group of 5 history in the college football playoff, went toe to toe with Alabama for a few quarters. Honestly, felt like his wide receivers let him down a little bit in that game. And people are like, oh, well, he's like a 3rd round pick, like he's not as good. And I'm here to tell you that I don't know that NFL teams think the same way that a lot of fans do about Desmond Ritter. But I don't know if you've had a chance to really watch him at all yet. I saw some of him and then obviously got to watch him at the Senior Bowl. But what are your thoughts sort of on Desmond Ritter, and is he a legitimate option at 8, despite what sort of the group think is about where he's going to go in the draft?
It's tough to say at 8.
Yeah, I mean it's early. I would say it's early.
But again, this is what I hate about mock drafts, and it's because all it takes is one team, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it sounds like the consensus based on if we were doing a draft via groupthink, 8 would be exceptionally high for Desmond Ritter, and so therefore, you would. If I was asking questions immediately after the first round to Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot, and Desmond Ritter was the pick at 8, I would at least say, hey, did you consider trading back before making the selection, and what led you to believe that would not be a viable option for you? Because that would obviously come into question. I have not really watched a ton of tape on him, but I did catch, I've watched probably like 15 minutes total on YouTube so far. So he's the next person that I'm going to dig into, but I did catch a couple of Cincinnati games over the past couple of years, because they have played Georgia. And then, just watching because of Desmond Ritter, I think that he has a lot of that experience. And I think that his pre-snap awareness, his decision-making with the ball, he really identifies, he knows where he needs to go, and he gets it out quickly. That I really, really like about him. Kind of the same stuff that I was knocking Kenny Pickett for. Kenny Pickett had the 2nd highest snap to throw time. And a lot of that was just because he was sitting back there. He's indecisive. He was trying to read it, see it open, and then throw it. Desmond Ritter, is very much the opposite. He knows where he needs to go with the ball. He has the arm to get it there, but he doesn't necessarily, have the best elite arm talent compared to some of the other guys. It's not even as good as Kenny Pickett's. I think his accuracy can kind of come and go. He's not, gonna just rifle it down the field. So he almost reminds me of more like, not like the very telltale end, but the late era Drew Brees, like that type of kind of player, obviously much more athletic. And that's where his combination will be very interesting. You could see it being a lot of RPO. Like that's the type of offense, a Philadelphia type of offense. I could see him fitting in really well, where he does have a little bit of that athletic ability to hurt you. Maybe not a fully designed run offense, but couple that with some quick, decisive passes, easy passes, fit him in these lanes, get him some easy throws, and not fully drop back, let him read the field, all of that stuff. So that's kind of how I see him fitting in. I don't know if that's really the Falcons offense. Um, so from that standpoint, Desmond Ritter, I would be shocked if he would be the pick for Atlanta, because the upside, the tools aren't there to the degree where it's worth betting on the upside, and the fit isn't quite to where I would be comfortable making him be the pick among this group of quarterbacks.
Yeah, it's interesting because Ritter's biggest issue, I would say, is that he's very inconsistent with his ball placement.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen, I think the arm strength is good, but it's hard to gauge sometimes because it's regularly off target. And I think part of that is that he doesn't always set his base when he throws. He makes a lot of plays on the run. And I think, honestly, he makes some of his best throws on the run, but when he actually has a clean pocket, I think that he doesn't always set his feet right. He doesn't do a lot of those little things well, and it causes the ball to not always be in the right place. But I think especially compared to 2020, because I was in on him in 2020 when I thought he might be, or 2021 when I thought he might be coming out last year. His placement was better this year. I thought he was a more effective runner. It was smarter about when he ran the ball, and I do wonder if the Falcons are going to value that dual threat ability and go for more of that sort of Tannehill type quarterback. Who Tannehill's definitely not a guy that's going to take off and run like regularly, but the running is much more a part of his game than it was for someone like Matt Ryan. Tannehill in particular was in the red zone. In particular, the Titans were using him as
he's a former receiver.
Yes, exactly. So
yeah.
And Ritter has that sort of athletic ability, and he's got some decent feel as a rusher too. So I do wonder if they want to move more towards that sort of style. But then again, it's sort of like levels of where you want to go. Because if you want the crazy good runner with the special arm that just needs a lot of seasoning, it's Malik Willis, and that's one end of the spectrum. Then in the middle, you kind of have Desmond Ritter, who does, is much more ready to play, not quite as talented in terms of his athleticism or arm talent as Willis, but he's going to be able to start a little bit earlier and has probably a higher floor. And then I think you've got Pickett on the other end of the spectrum, who I think has the highest floor of these guys, but the ceiling isn't necessarily there for anywhere near what Malik Willis could offer. So it just really depends on the flavor you want. I think for a team like the Panthers that really desperately needs someone to come in and start, I think they will lean towards someone like Pickett, not just because of who Pickett is as a player, but all the connections there. And they can't start Sam Darnold this year. That would just be foolish. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I think for the Falcons, obviously 8 would be extremely rich for Desmond Ritter, and I would expect it to be something they either do after a trade back or after a trade up, into the later part of the first round. But it shouldn't shock anyone if it ends up being Ritter at 8, even though it would probably be infuriating for most of us, and would definitely be a huge gamble there.
See, I would so much rather look at a guy like Sam Howell in the second round, or possibly even the third round, depending on just how, the league feels about him, because the upside with somebody like Sam Howell is way higher to me than Desmond Ritter. And a lot of the problems that you see in Howell's game are progression based. It's, trusting the offense, being a little more patient in the pocket and buying time. But a lot of the things that he does really well are his innate feel in the pocket. When he does trust the offensive line, he moves really well in the pocket. He is big. He is mobile. He can break tackles. He can shrug off sacks. He's got a huge arm. He can put some great touch on the ball. So it's like, these are the traits that I think, Joe is talking about. I'd much rather bet on that. And even if it's going to take, a second round pick, and you would rather wait to the third round, you're not giving up that much value there going, your first third round pick to your second round pick. That's not as big a jump as going 8 overall.
Right.
So
right.
I would be much more interested in seeing the Falcons go that route than unless it is somebody. Malik Willis, I think, would be the only person who you would understand why it would be that pick at 8 because of the upside. You're just betting on that. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of the only one that I would see.
Yeah. I think that's definitely the most likely one if they do go that route. But yeah, it's just crazy how how so far apart all these quarterback rankings are. Like, Derek Klassen, who's a guy like, has Ritter QB1 and Malik like QB3 and Pickett like QB5 or something like that. And then you've got some guys that are like Pickett's 1 and Ritter's 5 and, Howell's 2. And it's so all over the place. So I'm really interested to see how it actually shakes out, because I think in terms of the media, it's just all over the place and everybody seems to have different opinions on these guys. So it is an entertaining class in that way, even if it isn't necessarily a star-studded group at the top. But other than quarterback, we've talked about edge a lot, talked about offensive tackle. We brought it up earlier in the show, wide receiver as an option. I'm on the record as not being a fan at 8. After trade down, even a small trade down of like 3 or 4 spots, I would probably be much more interested based on how the board's going to look then. But at 8, I just have a hard time slotting a wide receiver as like a top pick. Like I just don't have any wide receivers in my top 10 at all. So, but you may. So what is your thought on the possibility of a wide receiver at 8?
I mean, I think that we're seeing so many of the players coming out of college, especially at receiver, be ready immediately to make an impact in the NFL. So even if this is not, a Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle type of class, I don't think it's very far off. I really think that your top guys in this group, and some people will make that a group of 5 with Treylon Burks. Some people will just have it kind of be the top 4 with Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jameson Williams. Those are 4 really, really good wide receivers, coming out of college, and they all kind of are, you can pick your poison here, I think. And that is where, if you're looking at 8, any of those guys could be in play, not necessarily because one is better than the other. They're all like worthy of being the number 8 pick. I think they're all pretty close to each other talent-wise. It's just, what do you value in an offense? If you value, physicality, if you value catch radius, if you value size at that position, then Drake London's probably going to be your guy. If you value somebody who can absolutely take the top off of a defense and demands a single or a safety over the top every single play, then Jameson Williams is probably your pick. So that's where I think that the Falcons could fall in love with one of these guys and consider them their number 1 type of receiver moving forward. Because I think, all of these guys, maybe with the exception of Jameson and Chris Olave, can be probably like a bona fide, number 1 go-to guy in this. But I think the other 2 could be really, really good number 2s, or, Jameson could emerge into Tyreek Hill, who knows? But I just think that Atlanta could love Drake London and say, yeah, we think he's going to be Mike Evans, and just year in and year out be an all-pro for us and get 13 touchdowns a season and 1,400 yards and catch 120 passes. And we're going to take that. That would probably be worth the number 8 pick. So yeah, I think wide receiver is certainly on the table. It's just not necessarily where I would go with the pick, but I could understand why the Falcons would say that they should, because history has shown betting on wide receivers coming out of college is not the worst bet anymore.
Right.
And that there are some players here who I could see the Falcons liking. I think Drake London, first and foremost among that, fits the bill that Arthur Smith wants. And, if he really, really likes that skill set, I think Drake London will be there. And then it comes down to how much do the Falcons like it.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the one that I have circled was Drake London, based on what we know that Arthur Smith typically likes. And London, honestly, like, I think he's the one with the best chance of being that sort of prototype wide receiver 1, obviously not the athlete that Julio Jones is, but that when you picture that wide receiver 1, the old school style wide receiver 1, the big X guy that's going to dominate 50-50 balls. And London runs really good routes. That was the one thing that I was really surprised with when I watched his tape, was that for a guy of his size, who some people have said like, oh, he's not that smooth of an athlete. Like, I don't know what the hell they're talking about. Like, this guy runs great routes.
It's basketball footwork.
Yeah. And it's not like he's going to break someone's ankles with these routes. He's not Tyreek Hill or anybody, but he runs really good routes. He's very experienced, tremendous hands, the contested catch ability. You put him out there with Kyle Pitts, and nobody's going to be able to triple team Kyle Pitts anymore. That's not an option. So, like, in some ways, I would get the pick. And I think how you phrased it of like it's in play at 8 is absolutely true. I don't really know that there's a lot of positions that aren't in play at all at 8. But, I think wide receiver, it would be tough for me to justify because I think this is a really terrific class overall. And I just think that there's very little separating like wide receiver 1 and like wide receiver 5. And then there's like another group of guys like wide receiver 6 through 10 is all really close. So it's like,
yeah,
I might rather have like a Jermaine Johnson or a Trayvon Walker, or Jordan Davis or whoever, if Iquanu or Evan Neal fall or whatever, if one of those guys happens to be there, I'd rather have them versus the drop off at those positions in the second round, and then have like a Christian Watson or a John Mechie or whoever, George Pickens in the second round at 43 versus like Drake London and then like having to settle for the next best pass rusher, which
right.
I think there's going to be a big run on pass rushers. So like there's going to be good guys, but like Arnold Ebiketie is maybe going to be the best guy there at 43 or something. So the drop off there might be a little bit more severe. So we'll see, but I definitely like these wide receivers, and I think there's a lot of upside there. I know Garrett Wilson was one that was really mocked a lot to the Falcons, and that's I think Garrett Wilson's a very good player. It's sort of like I don't know how good the fit would be in Atlanta because he played a ton in the slot. I just don't know. He can play outside. He did play outside at times for Ohio State, but not really the archetype that Arthur Smith generally goes for, and just not sure how much priority the Falcons will put on a guy that is maybe at his best in the slot. I mean, even though he could play on the outside, I think most of his truly dominant reps are coming from the slot. So it's just, it's interesting to see how are they going to prioritize this position. They sort of, with their free agent signings, haven't really backed themselves into a corner. Like they got a big guy in Auden Tate. They got a small speedy guy in Damiere Byrd who can be the Z or the slot or whatever. They have some depth. So they really don't have to get one or the other, but you have to think they probably prioritize the archetype of a Drake London more than a Garrett Wilson. But that's a tough call. And sort of on that route, you mentioned Jameson Williams, and this is sort of the other draft conversation I wanted to have tonight, which was, is this year when we know they're going into what's almost certainly the first year of a multiple year rebuild, is it better for them to target immediate impact guys, or is it better for them to consider taking some of the players that might fall a little bit, like a Jameson Williams, who might not be able to contribute as much in year one, whether due to injury or other, just needing development, but going for those higher ceiling guys as opposed to these instant impact guys because, who really cares about 2022 in the grand scheme of things for this Falcons team? So what's sort of, where do you land on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think if Jameson Williams gets pushed into the second round, no question,
of course. Yes,
you'd take him there.
Yeah.
I think that, and I'm totally blanking on the name, but who was the Notre Dame linebacker who the Cowboys drafted a few years ago?
Yeah.
Yes. If you're in a situation like that, maybe, that's a scenario where maybe the guy is going to miss essentially all of the year and drops well below where he should. If we're talking about a fringe top 10, top 15 talent that's automatically or all of a sudden there when you're picking again in the second round, maybe. But I think that the team is going to look less at year one and year two and more just where is his ceiling? What kind of player do we think he's going to evolve into? What is his development trajectory look like? I think they're looking more in the totality of this player's future. Where do we project him to be? Where is his ceiling? How likely is it to get there? Than just, okay, this player maybe fell 4 more spots than he was supposed to because of this medical red flag. So let's take him now. I think that if they, medical red flag or not, if they loved the player, they're going to take the player. It just now happens that we don't expect them to be very good next year. So we can justify them taking that player as, okay, well, they don't care so much about the future. They care more about not the present, the future. When they may have taken that player regardless, even if they were expecting to compete next year, just because they think his ceiling is so high. So that's where I think that I do trust Terry Fonda when he says, if we think that he's going to be like a future Hall of Famer, it kind of doesn't matter what we have at that position. It doesn't matter X, Y, and Z. We're going to take that player. And that's how I think they're looking at this.
Yeah. And I think that was the reason behind the Kyle Pitts pick, is that they viewed this guy as a potential Hall of Fame talent, and they weren't even willing to take a quarterback, even one that was probably highly rated. You know, obviously Justin Fields, I think, went, you know, just a few picks later. So, you know, they viewed Kyle Pitts as that good that they were willing to take a guy at sort of a non-traditional position that high in the draft. And I do wonder, you know, if they will continue to employ that strategy this year.
Yes.
You know, probably. And, you know, I know we should talk about it for George Costanza's sake. But Jordan Davis at 8, you know, this is a contentious topic as well. And this is another one that's probably likely to be more of a future-focused pick, because although Jordan Davis is going to be an impact run stopper, he's going to be an elite nose tackle, he's going to shut down the run, he's going to sort of change the way the Falcons can play the run and make them probably instantly one of the best run defenses in the NFL, we already know that, like, that's not necessarily something that is going to change your defense from being, like, really good, like, bad to good. The run defense is, like, an important part of it, but if you don't have the pass defense behind it, it really doesn't matter. So, but Jordan Davis, we know from his athletic testing, we've seen it on tape, this guy has terrific flashes as a pass rusher. He hasn't really done it consistently. You know, there's probably a need to keep his weight sort of at the level he showed up at the combine. You know, I think him playing at that 340 where he tested out like literally an alien, I think that's his best plan going forward, but it's unreasonable to sort of expect Jordan Davis to adjust to playing, you know, 20, 30 pounds lighter in his rookie season and become this impact pass rusher all of a sudden. But again, if we're going off of the strategy of, like, are we just taking the best player and we don't really care about 2022, does Jordan Davis make more sense for the Falcons at 8?
I'm so glad that you asked me this question, because I went on Pro Football Focus's NFL Stock Exchange podcast recently. They were doing a mock draft where they, you know, had people who cover each team on to make that pick. And Jordan Davis was my pick at 8. And the reasoning that I gave was looking back at last year's draft, you know, which is the only sample we have to go off of.
Yeah.
Kyle Pitts, a unicorn in that draft. I think in this draft, outside of Kyle Hamilton, Jordan Davis is considered just, they don't make them like Jordan Davis. And I just see the Falcons. There's something that I can't recall if it was Terry Fonda. It probably was Terry Fonda, but it may have been Arthur Smith as well. In their introductory press conference, said something along the lines of, and it was in explaining his drafting best player available strategy. You don't know what your roster is going to look like 2-3 years down the road. And so you drafting for need, you're just drafting for an immediate fill, but you're not necessarily long-term planning. You're not able to really look at your roster, say, okay, well, we can afford to move on from this player because we've got so-and-so behind him. We can afford to do this. We've got a surplus here, so we can trade this backup piece who is really good, but can get minutes elsewhere, and we can get something in return. You just build assets around, and then you figure it all out. I think the Falcons are nowhere close to knowing what the actual identity of this team is, and certainly not knowing what the identity of the team that they hope to build to compete will be. But I bet that they would love to have somebody like Jordan Davis on it.
Yeah.
And to me, it's just, if you don't necessarily know what the chessboard looks like, accumulate as many queens as possible. And I look at Kyle Pitts as a queen on a chessboard. I look at Jordan Davis as a queen on a chessboard. I don't understand the fascination that we all now have with nose tackles having to be like elite pass rushers. When is that? Sure, Aaron Donald is
It's
Aaron
nice,
Donald,
but
he's not a nose tackle, and
No.
they also don't make them like him. Can I tell you, some of the best defenses over the last 2 decades have featured guys that are just like Jordan Davis. Your Haloti Ngata's, your Casey Hamptons, your Vince Wilforks, these massive dudes who are also very athletic, right in the middle of your defense, that frees up so much of all of the stuff behind them. And it allows a defensive coordinator to really like change how they call games, the type of players they bring in. You can bring in more specialized guys because you trust that player right in the middle to just cause so much havoc and literally change offensive game plans because they know that that's just not a viable option for them. Atlanta has never had anybody that can impact the game that way in any facet of the game. So sure, it's not Khalil Mack coming off of the edge, but I'll take somebody who that immediately putting them in there, even as a rookie, even on a rotation, which that's not an issue because you can just slide Grady Jarrett down inside where he should be on pass rushing downs anyway. So take Jordan Davis off the field and you still don't really lose any part of your pass rush. And maybe he can stay in there and be a decent pass rusher and learn. I mean, he's probably going to get better. I see that as a massive win. You're at least upgrading one aspect of your game, I think, in a big way immediately. And that's what Atlanta's got to start doing. They've got to start getting better at some things. Even if that's not the pass rush, I'll take improving the run defense overnight and then potentially the pass rush long term with somebody who is a generational freak at this sport.
Yeah, and like, the nose tackle never gets the credit, but I think on all the teams that you mentioned, the nose tackle was vital. And maybe the nose tackle doesn't get paid the big bucks, and maybe the nose tackle doesn't get all.
So draft
sacks.
him and afford him. You don't have to deal with these big bucks.
You don't have to pay him $20 million a year. That would be nice for these first round picks. But again, like, it's the positional value is sort of overrated. Like, just take good players for God's sake. Like, just take guys, like, so many first round picks bust. And no one ever talks about the busts. Like, of course, we talk about it when it happens to the Falcons. It's like, oh, yeah, Takk McKinley, I hesitate to call Vic Beasley a true bust because that guy clearly had the talent. He just didn't put it together. But, like, so many first-round picks bust that if you just have someone that like, this guy's just going to be, like, an elite run defender. And, like, we hope he can, keep the weight off and be an impact pass rusher for us, too, eventually. But, like, if he's just, like, a top 3 run defender in the NFL that allows us to play smaller linebackers that are better in coverage or are faster or more disruptive, whatever, because that's what he does immediately. Like, if you don't like the look of Deion Jones back there having to evade blocks all the time, there's no better way to get around that than putting Jordan Davis in the middle of that defensive line. Like, there's no way. Like, you can't block him one-on-one. Like, no one ever did. No one in his entire career has been able to block Jordan Davis one-on-one. And they re-signed Anthony Rush, too. And Anthony Rush, if you want to stop the run, you put Jordan Davis, Anthony Rush at 3-4 defensive end, and Grady Jarrett at the other one, and no one's running on that front, like, at all. It's not going to happen.
Also, the NFL, I think, is cyclical. And I really do think that you're seeing defenses last year, they really adjusted to take away what a lot of the offenses have now been getting away with for years, which are these deep, explosive plays that benefit a lot of the quarterbacks that are this new generation, and they're making them force their way down the field. And it becomes inherently riskier when you're throwing the ball that much more often to pick your way down the field. You're throwing in traffic. You're not getting these explosive plays created by scheme design that should be much easier throws, catches, home run balls. That's what these offenses want to run. I think we're going to start seeing teams turn back to run games a little bit more. I think you're going to start seeing teams get a little bit bigger, take advantage of some of these smaller defenses that have evolved over the years to catch up with some of the passing game and start to impose their will a little bit. And if you get ahead of the curve in that sense, all the better.
Yeah. And like, you're absolutely on point there. What really frazzled the Bills and the Chiefs this year were the defenses, and not just them, but a lot of the good offenses, the defenses that could play cover 2 and stop the run. Those were the defenses that gave them problems because they could have the deep safeties, but they were still able to stop their run games without having to bring those safeties up into the box. And if you can do that, you create a lot of problems for opposing passing games. And it makes a lot of sense. Like, one edge pick isn't fixing the Falcons pass rush. As much as I love Jermaine Johnson, or Trayvon Walker, if he's your thing, those are the guys that are most likely going to be an option at 8, and maybe neither one of them makes it. I mean, honestly, some mocks we've seen 5 go before the Falcons pick, which is absurd, but it's possible. These guys, it's the edge. You're basically looking at, do you take the top defensive tackle prospect who is really a unique player? We've never really seen his like before. And like, sure, there's concerns, and maybe he's only an elite run defender or whatever. But at the end of the day, like, I'm not that concerned about that. Like, I think Jordan Davis will be a passable pass rusher. at worst. And I think the main thing for him is, can he keep his weight down, and the conditioning stuff. I don't know how serious that is, but those are things that I think you get in an NFL strength conditioning program. You have the resources that an NFL team does. As good as Georgia is and as many resources as they have, they're not an NFL team. So I'm not concerned about that. I think if you're, I think you could easily see, like, look, do we want the best defensive tackle or do we want the fourth edge? And like, as much as I like Jermaine Johnson, and as much as I'm warming up to Trayvon Walker, who is also the other like alien in this draft.
I like Trayvon Walker.
Yeah,
I was just about to Trayvon Walker. I may have subconsciously said Locker, but I was just, you said alien. I was literally just trying to think of a comparison for him. And the thing that I came up with was, if you're like playing a video game or you're watching an alien movie or something, and you they're like introducing the different parts of the species, and then you reach the person where you're like, oh, you're clearly like the one that's not supposed to be messed with. Like, you're their alpha warrior.
Yeah.
That's what like Trayvon Walker looks like. Like, if he was created to be just like the alpha of like some alien species that would be presented as like the champion in some,
yes, exactly. The
like,
single
far
Combat.
Away.
That's
exactly.
who he gets.
That's what he would be.
Yeah. And like, it was funny because I was watching Nakobe Dean today for a scouting report, and like I saw like I can't remember if it was Jameson Williams or somebody else that broke out in the open field, and then everybody else is chasing him down, and then you just see Trayvon Walker just come from out of frame and like chase down Jameson Williams or whoever it was somehow, like, and it's like, who is that? I thought it was Channing Tindall at first. I saw the 4, but yeah, and then you just see this dude fly in, and it's like, oh yeah, that's an edge rusher. Yeah, so I mean, Trayvon Walker is a huge wild card, but again, like, if he's the other one that would sort of not surprise me, but I think, we're hearing that he might go even higher because he's an alien and an edge rusher. So the positional value sort of lines up a little bit, better for that in the top 10. But, I speaking of George tipped again, talking about Davis. Davis is just that good. He was saying that the only team behind us that is probably going to take a quarterback, like right behind us, is Seattle, but he doesn't see them moving up for Willis. He would only consider 2 players above Jordan Davis in this class, and that would be Evan Neal and Derek Stingley. But yeah, I mean, I think Davis is absolutely worth 8. I just think the whole positional value discussion is sort of a waste of time. It's like, just take good players. And obviously it's like, don't take a punter at 8. As much as I'm part of Ariza Hive, okay? I'm not advocating for Matt Ariza at 8, but like, within reason, you should just take good players. Like, if you've got a Pro Bowl nose tackle in Jordan Davis versus you're not necessarily sure, maybe you don't like the edge guys that are there, maybe it's the 4th or 5th one that's available at your spot. Maybe you're like, we like Sauce or Stingley or whoever, but we don't necessarily value a cornerback as high here because of the way our depth chart is constructed right now. It wouldn't shock me at all if Davis is the pick, because he is that unique of a player, and he would definitely fit that sort of unicorn mold that they're going for. So, or it could be a trade down. We could see the trade down and they go and get him a little bit later, but it won't be too much later, because there are teams that will be interested very quickly after that. But yeah, I mean, the one that we really didn't talk about is corner. And I guess for me, I'm not the biggest fan of Stingley in the top 8. I do think that he's a worthy first-round pick. But for me, if I haven't seen you play at a top 10 level in the last 2 seasons, it's a big red flag for me. And it's definitely been injury, and there was the COVID year. And Stingley's 2019 tape is really damn good, but it also was from 2019. So, like, I can't put him above Sauce. I can't put him above Andrew Booth. So I know people like Stingley, and I get the flashes. I get everything about him. He's a good athlete. But, for me, it would probably be Sauce. I like Andrew Booth too, but with his injury, maybe that pushes it down. But do you think cornerback is something you would consider at 8, or is that one that you would probably rather take later?
I probably later. I feel like if the Falcons went cornerback at 8, that more than maybe any other position, I would understand the reason, but I feel like I would come away scratching my head with that one a little bit more than maybe anything else, just because I am a huge fan of the Casey Hayward signing. I think everybody is. And AJ Terrell, like, it's not a luxury to have two shutdown corners, but there's also no guarantee that either of these guys are going to develop in a shutdown corner. So there's that. But also, like, wouldn't that be kind of the weirdest waste on this team? So cool, you've got like two guys who are just awesome cornerbacks and young cornerbacks. Are you going to now start winning like 10-7 games? Like I just don't. There's so many other parts of this roster that need to catch up, that seems like investing in a luxury, even though the benefit of having like a shutdown secondary is maybe like the third most valuable thing you could have in the NFL as a team identity. But the Falcon, that's just so far ahead of where it seems like the Falcons timeline is right now that it wouldn't make sense to me.
It's a huge luxury. And like, I would get it because Casey Hayward is nearing the end of his career. He also can play the slot. He's played the slot very well. So, if they do take a Sauce or...
I like the guys a lot. I mean, they're good players.
It's like they'd probably ask Hayward to move into the slot then. And that could be an elite cornerback trio and all this. But again, it's
like why the Isaiah Oliver thing?
Well, exactly. I'd probably rather see if Isaiah Oliver or Darren Hall can Isaiah Oliver was looking really damn good last year. And then Darren Hall, they're probably hoping can be, a long-term guy there if Oliver struggles or if they let him walk next year. He played okay, especially in the slot. He looked better there. So it just seems like a luxury. Like I'd much rather, my mock today, I'd had them taking like Alontae Taylor, at the towards the end of day 2, early day 3, and I'd much rather have that, like a developmental outside guy, someone that has the ceiling to start, but probably needs a year or two, and that works out really well with Casey Hayward's timeline and all that stuff. They need more of like a depth guy at corner that could maybe be a future starter as opposed to like an immediate top 10 pick there. And it's not like it would be a bad pick. Like if you're convinced that Sauce is like the next AJ Terrell, the best, another shutdown corner, then it's like, okay, I totally get that. But I guess I have a hard time seeing that pick as likely now, but yeah.
Would be weird for them to constantly be like, we need to develop and win in the trenches, and then just to draft a corner at number 8.
They're going to make Sauce bulk up, and he's going to play edge, okay? That dude's long as hell, okay? He's got the length.
Yeah, just speed and length on the interior. That's all they need.
Yeah, but no, it's an interesting conversation. We're going to have more conversations about it as we get closer to the draft. It's less than a month away now. We're getting very, very close, guys. Like I said before, please do like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Those really help us out. If you haven't checked it out already, check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/Falcoholic Live if you want to support the show on a monthly basis. We really appreciate that. And the Falcoholic podcast is on a short hiatus. We're working on getting that going again. So stay tuned for news on that front as well. I apologize, as we aren't uploading these to the podcast feed right now, but hopefully we'll be able to soon. But yeah, before we sign off, any final takes you want to let fly, Will, before we sign off tonight?
Nah, no final takes. I think we pretty much covered everything. Jordan Davis, just, it seems, I get the positional value thing, but if you're looking at this and you think Jordan Davis can be the best nose tackle and maybe a top 5 defensive tackle, and then you're looking at the receivers and you're like, the ceiling for this whole group of receivers is the 13th best receiver, or Jermaine Johnson's ceiling is maybe the 18th best edge rusher, then positional value only gets you so far. And even at a less valuable quote unquote position, getting one of the best players or one of the best prospects that we've seen in years may be better than getting like the 4th edge rusher, even though edge rusher is more valuable and a clear need, because there are clear needs all over this roster for this team. So that's my last little Jordan Davis spiel. And with that, I will say thank you, Kevin, and turn it back over.
Yes, well, I knew that there would be Jordan Davis discussion, so I knew we had to get you on for that. But before we sign off, we got one final tip from Kevin Dog with the $5. Thank you, Kevin. simply saying good job. I don't know if he's talking specifically about the Jordan Davis takes, but that's how I'm choosing to interpret it. So, you know, he's happy about the Jordan Davis takes. I know George Costanza is happy about the Jordan Davis takes. You know, George infamously predicted Kyle Pitts back in like September of the 21 season. He's been on the Jordan Davis pick for the Falcons from the very beginning as well. So if he nails this one, you know, we're just going to have to start calling him, you know, George Nostradamus or something like that. And then we're going to have to get his, you know, draft pick and just put it in pen as soon as he says it every year. But yeah, Will is at Will McFadden on Twitter, host of the Believe in Falcons podcast with Olu Mahaley. Will, anything else you're working on that you'd like to let the people know about?
No, just the scouting reports. So, you know, just got Kenny Pickett, which will come up, I guess, tomorrow at noon. And then who knows what I've got next.
Yeah, lots of good ones. I know you signed up for some, so I'm interested to see which one we see next. I signed up for like 20 more that I'm going to try to crank out before.
I need to go match you.
You know, it's okay.
It's crazy.
I just like wanted to make sure I had like, because you got wide receiver and quarterback. I was like, all right.
Got midway through like the third round over here, dude.
Yeah, so it's like we're gonna you know get some of these top prospects at a lot of positions just because for my own needs, you know, I want to.
Jeremy Ruckert, you're gonna scout Jeremy Ruckert.
Hell yeah, bro.
All right,
Likely. If I can scrounge up some Coastal Carolina, we're gonna watch Likely. You know, I got my hands on some UTSA, brother. So maybe Tariq Woolen we can throw in at the last minute. So. You know, we'll get it going, but you know, we'll see. But yeah, guys, I'm Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin. Like Will was saying, we got scouting reports coming. I've got 2 more linebackers coming this week. Nakobe Dean will be tomorrow afternoon, and then I'll have who was the other one I did today? Chad Muma from Wyoming. He will be Friday. I like Chad Muma a lot. You might be surprised how highly he was graded, actually. And part of that's because he literally tested out as like another alien. I think he had like a 9.78 RAS. But he's actually just a really good player. So, you know, Wyoming's just a linebacker factory now, I guess. They just are just cranking these guys out. But, and then if you missed it, I had my mock draft today as well. My next mock draft come out. It was a no trades mock draft. And I did not take Desmond Ridder at 8. So for those of you that were like worried that was going to happen based on my tweets the other day, that's not the case. I did not. I'm sure I took a player that everyone would be happy with. I would definitely be happy if he ended up being there, but probably not going to be there. So, but yeah, guys, really appreciate everyone for tuning in tonight. A little bit of a shorter show, but you know we got to pace ourselves as we come up towards the draft here. As always, guys, we will be having a live draft party. I don't know if we confirmed it on here or not yet, but we will be doing that once again all 3 days of the draft. So stay tuned for the details of that as well. And yeah, we'll just have more and more terrific content coming out for your viewing pleasure all the way up until the draft. And then, you know, we'll probably have some content after the draft. You know, I can't guarantee it will be spicy because there's really not anything going on between like May 1st and July 25th approximately. But we're going to do our best to make it seem like there's interesting content because that's our job. So stay tuned to thefalcoholic.com. Stay tuned to the Falcoholic Live, and we will talk to you guys next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Until then, guys, have a great night. We'll see you next time. See you, folks.